Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another great episode of Time 100 Talks, a show where we bring together extraordinary leaders from every field to spotlight solutions and encourage action toward a better world. I'm Time 100 Talks correspondent Ashley C. Ford. Today's show will cover all of the ongoing issues our nation continues to battle, from tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, the fight for racial justice, the impact of this year's presidential election, and how the arts, through all of this, continues to play a role in our lives. Here to discuss how all these things intersect is activist and co-founder of Until Freedom, Tamika Mallory. She will speak with Time's Lysandra Villa about how her social justice group is working with the family of Breonna Taylor to seek justice for her killing. We also have father-son duo Lin-Manuel Miranda and Luis Miranda, who will discuss their new documentary, Siempre Luis, and how Broadway can be supported during such difficult times. They'll be joined by Time's CEO and editor-in-chief, Edward Felsenthal. And our first guest joining us today is former U.S. Senate Majority Leader and physician Bill Frist, who will speak to Time's Alice Park about the U.S.'s response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Take it away, Alice.
Thanks, Ashley. I'm Alice Park, Senior Health Correspondent for Time, and I'm joined today by former Senate Majority Leader and founder of Nashville Health, Dr. Bill Frist. Dr. Frist, welcome to Time 100 Talks.
Thank you, Alice. Good to be with you.
So let's start with the upcoming election and the very first presidential debate. There wasn't much of a solid exchange of ideas or even laying the groundwork for what Americans can expect in the next 4 years from either President Trump or Vice President Biden, especially in the area of health and health reform. What did you take away from the debate?
Well, the debates were discouraging, and we don't need to go into all of that. But in terms of, I think, of the way both candidates came across, and maybe the moderator. But in terms of health, the Republicans really have not put a health plan on the table, either for public health or for private health, more acute health or for preventive medicine. They just haven't, and they haven't done it over the last 4 years. That's disappointing to me as a Republican. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden, I've interacted with him a lot. I served with him for 12 years. I was majority leader over Joe Biden for 4 years, so I know him well. He's been very committed to, we all know, cancer, in part because of his son, but for 2 years, he literally traveled the country and the world. I saw him in Rome one time talking and addressing the Pope about the importance of cancer treatment, research, the moonshot, they called it. He's more deeply embedded in the organic part of medicine. In terms of policy, all we know is that he's going to support Obamacare. Obamacare is really only about 20 million people today. It's not 350 million people, and Medicaid expansion. But he says he wants to improve that. Does not want to give away and ignore private health insurance. So he didn't shift at all. He stayed right where he was, but he made the statement more towards the center in healthcare, rejecting the more extreme Medicare for all. So on one side, you have no plan in terms of the president, and on the other, you have this deep experience with cancer, and the sort of impact of what he will do. But again, no specifics in the plan other than supporting Obamacare.
And of course, we've been battling a major public health crisis in COVID-19 this year. How would you grade the U.S. response to the pandemic?
I've been on this a long time, and when I was in the Senate back in 2005, gave a series of speeches 20 different times on the coming pandemic and the fact we needed a Manhattan Project in order to predict what was inevitable, another pandemic, or at least another virus that could create. It's inevitable, it's science, it's what the virus does, it's what it's done for thousands, millions of years. And I would give us a B if you go back to last 15 years, because we established things like BARDA. We invested more in some partnerships of potentially creating vaccines alike. BARDA is a bioterrorism related entity that we created. So I give us a B and not an A because we were so ill-equipped this time around because of the lack of investment predominantly in public health infrastructure. we kind of forgotten what was happening in early 2000. We've forgotten the earlier pandemics. We forgot what happened back, 1918. We just forgot all of that. And so I would not give us an A because we were not equipped. We weren't equipped in terms of communication, in terms of research, in terms of public health infrastructure, in terms of antiviral agents. And now since then, which is probably where your question was, I would give us a B and might go to a B plus. I give us a B plus because I think more recently, as we've looked at data that we've learned, we have responded with a clearer voice. But I think the president should not have been the one communicating the medical science. We got off on issues like not wearing masks when it is proven, the science is there, that mask works, it is life-saving. The communication issue, I would give a D to. And if you look back at my writings in 2005 and all of my speeches then, I put the importance of communication in public health emergencies, in bioterrorism, and especially in pandemics to be the most important thing, because that's where the trust needs to be built. And if that trust is not there, then the American people will not change their behavior, will not listen, will not take the vaccines, will not take the antiviral agents. So I don't think we've done very well initially. It's getting better. And it's getting better because instead of saying just trust the scientists, people are saying let's trust the data. As we learn what works, let's implement that into our public policy.
Other people in public health have given the U.S. a failing grade on the response so far. Does the number of deaths and cases that we're seeing, does that surprise you? Did you think it would get to this point when the pandemic began at the start of the year?
Yeah, the fact that 4% of the population is here and we have 20% of the deaths, that by definition is F. That is a failing. And so, but is it all government response, or is it lack of individual responsiveness to the behavior itself? So it's easy to blame either one person, say the president of the United States, but I think it's much more complex than that. And we're all at fault. We've underinvested in public health. Just since in 2004, 2005, if you look at the amount of funding for people on the front line, in our state epidemiologists, in our local public health departments, there have been 56,000 people fewer today in those frontline jobs in public health than there were just since the Great Recession, not that long ago. As I was going to say, since I was in government officially back 2004, 2005, overall funding for our local health departments, the health department that's 5 miles from our viewers and our listeners now, has been cut. The funding has been cut on the front line by about a third since 2003, 4, 5, and 6. So that explains a lot of the lack of preparedness. That explains the 4% versus 20% of the deaths is there. So it's not all just the leadership or just this administration. It's a lack of preparation. And then the response to it, of course, has been inadequate, which is where my B comes in.
And you're a physician, surgeon, and as you said, one of very few senators to bring that kind of a background to Congress. Having seen the process from both sides, as a physician and as a representative, why do you think health in the United States is so politicized? We've seen it with drug pricing, we've seen it with our response to global pandemics like HIV and COVID-19. Why do you think it's so politicized?
Well, it's interesting. On the public health and sort of acute health, I was a heart transplant surgeon, so I took people's hearts out, put new hearts in, and took care of people with heart disease. But then when I transplanted that heart, I would send them back to their community. And the community, and whether or not they survived, because I had to give them immunosuppressants, would depend on if it was a lung transplant, was the air clean? Is the water clean that they swim in, or that they bathe in, or that they mix their medicines in? So my understanding of public health was really that, and I fought biases in my transplant. So all this was sort of second nature to me. But when I came to the United States Senate in 1996, there had not been a physician or a nurse in the United States Senate in 68 years. And so there's a fundamental lack of understanding at that level, with 18% of our economy in healthcare, that we actually have to inject. Obamacare, coming back to our sort of bipartisan thing, Obamacare was not There's a lot of good things in Obamacare, a lot of good things that are there today, a lot of negative things, but it was bipartisan. It was not bipartisan, it was nonpartisan. And therefore, for the next 10 years, people are trying to tear it down. And when something would go wrong, even if they voted for it, they said, well, it's not me and people who didn't vote for it. So this idea of getting people together is very, very important. In terms of why healthcare is partisan today, it shouldn't be. Each one of us, as we're talking now, we have children and we have grandchildren and we have spouses who are going to get sick as we're going to get sick. We're going to all depend on the system itself. So all of us need to set certain goals to lift people up in terms of healthcare. And that's not just physical health, it's mental health, it's spiritual health, it is physical health as well as our social health as well. Now that we're expanding that definition, people are beginning to understand that health is more than just about taking care of a patient when they get sick. We have that opportunity to bring people together. How is that going to happen? It's going to take leadership to do that. It's going to take a president of the United States who believes in that, a president who can be trusted, a president who's committed to it. If we do that, not only do we lift up 350 million people, including the most vulnerable people who COVID have shown again and again that we've left behind, that we need to lift up, and we need to look at the equities issues itself. But by doing that, number two, we lift up cities. People become more productive. They have more hope. They stay in their jobs. There's less absenteeism. And then thirdly, there's hope for the future. People are down on America now and they're not looking in an optimistic way to the future. But if they are healthy and they've got a job and their family is healthy, they are more hopeful. And when they're more hopeful, they're more creative, they're more energetic, they're more giving, and they're more compassionate. And that's how important health and healthcare is to America and to the world.
And you referred to how Democrats and Republicans came together to address HIV. What lessons did you learn during your time in the Senate, during that time, about how to bring and create consensus around important issues like public health? And do you see any of those opportunities today?
Yeah, first of all, it's really important that people understand, it can be done. We doubled the funding of National Institutes of Health in a 5-year period, and we did that in a bipartisan way. We passed the Medicare bill. We passed the single largest global health bill passed by any president in the history of the world, the PEPFAR bill, that saved 20 million lives in a bipartisan way. And what it took is, number one, a president who led on it. The president, again, it doesn't have to be a president who's an expert on it. President Bush maybe had been to Africa one time before he put this on the table, but he was willing to listen. He sent Tony Fauci down to Africa. He trusted the science. Fauci came back and said, it can be done. We can lower the price and we can lead and we can save lives. Then you come down to the organic part, and this kind of is what I did in the majority, as majority leader. At that level of having people into your office, one Republican, one Democrat, very quietly, outside of the press, do it every single week. Number two would be a president, and we did this with President Bush for 2 of the years I was majority leader. Every other Friday, he would have the leadership over into the Oval Office in a quiet way, no press. So there would be Harry Reid, and there would be Nancy Pelosi sitting next to Denny Hastert, at the time, with me in the room. And that, even though it can be awkward, but sitting around a table in that kind of privacy with 6 people on a regular basis, to me, would revolutionize where we are today. Because it sends the signal for the leadership that bipartisanship, even if we don't get along, we have certain goals. It's the American people we're going to serve. We can bring them together. So again, that's at the congressional level. What you have to do is for HIV/AIDS, what I did is talk to Jesse Helms, who had been again, he said this virus was evil. It was morally wrong. But after we talked about it and brought people in the room, he basically came on board. We already had a lot of the sort of liberal advocates on the board. That sort of organic thing is made possible if the leadership at the top says that bipartisanship is important. Don't sacrifice your principles, but bipartisanship is important. Tom Daschle and I have an editorial on election integrity in the Washington Post. 30 of us got together, elected officials from the past, and the National Council on Election Integrity is what we call the group. And so Tom and I said, well, if we're going to be out there saying that every vote counts, every vote needs to be counted, the most important thing people can do is vote, and we have to ensure integrity of the system, which is what the editorial is about. Equally importantly is that you got 30 people from both sides of the aisle. And Senator Daschle and I, he was leader on the other side and I was leader, and we, represented our parties. Since we left the United States Senate, we've probably written 30 to 40 op-ed pieces together. And again, we don't agree on everything. And we've probably done 60 to 70 speaking engagements together. I think we need to see more of that. It's not just for past people like us who are not on the forefront anymore, but see more of that among our elected leaders today.
How confident are you that we will have a vaccine against COVID-19?
100%. Again, by understanding the virus itself and where science is today, not where it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we know that we can make the connectors, these little spikes coming out, we know we can incapacitate, in essence, the virus itself. The neat thing about it is we have other ways of both treating and other types of virus to make itself. And with that, I'm very confident being made. And as I said back in 2005, the real issue is going to be the manufacturing of it. And this administration has done a superb job, in paralleling the manufacturing at the same time we're figuring out the science, so that when we get the science and it is a safe vaccine, we can make it for sure. So that's to answer your question. We have the vaccine. We got to make sure it's safe. But as soon as we know it's safe, we'll be able to start distributing it. And then the distribution is going to come back. Is it equitable distribution? I think it is wrong that the United States has chosen, or the president has chosen, not to participate in the global forums to ensure equitable distribution of vaccine. I think it hurts the world. It hurts our image in the world. It hurts humanity itself. But right now, a lot of people, and I'm working with the administration as many other people, to ensure equitable distribution of this vaccine. It is not the holy grail. For too long, people have said, let's wait till the vaccine, we can all go back to work. It's going to be a year before we can get back to normal, some sense of normalcy in our lives, to where we're not waking up in the middle of the night with anxiety about it. I see the vaccine, probably before the end of the year, we'll have 2 vaccines that we know work, that will have very good evidence that they are safe, and that people will begin to be vaccinated before the end of the year. It'll be, health personnel, people who are on the front lines. But it won't be another 6 months. I'm just predicting. I don't know more than anybody else, except I'm talking to smart people. I think it'll be 6 months before people will be really getting the vaccine, and it'll be easy to get. We'll understand it, and we'll actually trust it. The anti-vax movement is setting us back a long way, but that just means we need to make sure this vaccine is absolutely safe before we put it in the fields.
And you referred to the drops in support and funding support for our public health system. And it's going to be the public health system that really bears responsibility for distributing this vaccine if and when we get one. How confident are you that that system is ready and will be able to equitably and efficiently distribute this vaccine or vaccines when they come?
I feel good about it. But until we're underway and we see both the safety profile, which we've got to have up front, but we see where the need is, and we'll do that, or it will be done in a way, as I suggested, taking populations of people like healthcare personnel. Back when I was a resident at Mass General in medicine, the hepatitis vaccine was a new vaccine. And it was in the same sort of process. That's back when vaccines would take 8 years to make. And we're making this one in 8 months, which is pretty amazing. It's fast, it's good. But we got the vaccine, and we were the first ones protected. And it was about 6 months later before it was really broadly commercially available that people were really comfortable with that. And that sort of distribution, with the amount of meetings being held and campaigns focusing on vulnerable populations, on distribution to the appropriate people, I feel very good about where we are today. But it's going to be hard. I know the president debate mentioned the military is going to be on the forefront, and that's good. And I have huge respect for the military, but there is a huge distrust of institutions today, and not necessarily the military, but people in uniform. And we have to work through that. The people of color today who have been disproportionately impacted in horrible and terrible ways today, right now, 8 months into this. Then we have vaccine distribution. Is there going to be trust there? We need empathetic people who can put themselves in the shoes and in the lives of people, vulnerable populations, most importantly, and then develop the system around that. And I feel good where we are today. I'm not going to relax for a year until we actually have that occur. Now, we'll just say I'm disappointed that our country has chosen not to participate at an organizational level in the world community. Our community health depends on our national health, and our national health depends on global health. And if we can't figure to capture these viruses early with good surveillance, with an investment in the infrastructure, in public health, they'll be right back around. I don't care what the vaccine is, and we'll start all over once again. And that's why we have to have not cutting funding at the local level and the state level, but increased funding around the world, because our health, where you're sitting and I'm sitting, and in our communities, ultimately determines our national health, and that is determined by global health.
Finally, Dr. Frist, I want to come back around to something you brought up, which was election integrity. And it seems that equally important is, of course, getting people to vote in the first place. And how do you do that? And with the threat of COVID-19 still looming, so many are probably facing a difficult decision about whether to exercise their civic duty and to vote, or listen to public health experts, who say to avoid public crowds that could be, gathering around polling places. What's your advice to the American public on voting during a pandemic?
Well, as I said in our op-ed with Tom Daschle, Senator Daschle, everybody must vote, should vote. It's probably the most primary responsibility, civic responsibility we have that determines things like how COVID is handled coming in. The second thing is that vote is really got to count. That means it has to be read. Elections can't be, sped up arbitrarily. That we need to count each one of those votes. And that's all a part of trust and integrity in the system. The debate was not helpful when you had the president basically saying it's a sham, you can't trust it coming on. That's not the way to address it, or it's not presidential to address it that way, because it doesn't reflect fact. And I think the fact is, when you've had the military for generations voting by ballot, not in person, and we have 46 states that have been actively doing it in the past and have not seen the corruption there that is implied, means that everybody needs to vote. If you can vote in person, I'm going to vote in person, just because I want to make it sort of crystal clear, and I can't predict what people are thinking now. But if not, the ballots are out there, and there's early voting that's out there. You just encourage people to vote. These are unprecedented times, and we didn't cause the virus, and China didn't cause the virus. The virus is just smarter than us. But if you put the virus into the economy and to the impact on, people in my family have had the virus, but the impact also on our economy and the people who've lost their jobs and the service industry, you see the impact. Our leaders do matter, and the voice matters. And as I talked earlier, bipartisanship matters if we want to transform and change it. And it's going to come from the top. And our senators are important, and our House members are important. But voting for who you feel will do the right thing for you for generations ahead is absolutely critical. The integrity of the process is there, so now it's getting people out to vote. And both parties will be working that in the best way that they can.
Dr. Frist, thank you so much for your time. We truly enjoyed having you on Time 100 Talks.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Appreciate it.
You're watching Time 100 Talks, and I'm correspondent Ashley C. Ford. Up next, we have activist Tamika Mallory, who'll be joined by Time's Lysandra Villa. Lysandra?
Thank you, Ashley. Hi, I'm Lysandra Villa, and I'm a staff writer at Time magazine. I'm joined today by Tamika Mallory, an activist and co-founder of Until Freedom, a social justice group that has been a very close ally of Breonna Taylor's family. Welcome to Time 100 Talks.
Thank you so much for having me.
In August, Until Freedom announced that the movement would occupy Kentucky until justice was received for Breonna Taylor. You have been in Kentucky ever since, leading demonstrations and doing the work. being so closely involved in a case like this can take a toll. So how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Unfortunately, I am probably just numb because of the fact that I feel I have seen this story play out too many times. It's as if I've been a part of a movie, only it is a nightmare that has been taking place for the 25 years that I've been working within this field. And so there is a sense of numbness. And there's also a sense that, this is to be expected because it's the America we live in. However, I'm very committed and I try to encourage everyone around me to feel it, not to allow ourselves to sort of sink into a place of, well, there's nothing that we can do. The situation just is what it is, and just become complacent and not have a sense of urgency. And I think that urgency comes from allowing yourself to process the pain and not to normalize injustice. Wherever it pops up or rears its ugly head, we've got to acknowledge it, call it out, and be able to say that it's not right. And we won't be silent while people are being killed, and also our lives, and particularly Black women's lives, as in this case with Breonna Taylor, are being ignored.
I do want to talk about the latest news in the Breonna Taylor case, which is that there is a juror who's seeking to have the transcripts of the grand jury deliberations made public. The juror is saying that the Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, didn't give the jury the option of indicting the two officers who shot her. And then the juror is saying that the Attorney General misrepresented the case publicly. The recording and permission for the juror to speak publicly have both been granted. There has been a lack of transparency and a lack of trust in the process of this case from the start. Mm-hmm. So will having the transcripts available affect that in any way? And what do you think that this means for Breonna's case?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to note what the juror has said. He actually, or she has actually not said at this point that they were not given charges. Attorney General Daniel Cameron said that in his statement that he released on the other evening. He talked about the fact that that his office only presented one charge for one individual in that case. And therefore, as far as we're concerned, it seems as if Daniel Cameron made a decision and his office decided all by themselves that the other officers, John Mattingly, Miles Cosgrove, and also we have to include Joshua James, who is the officer that lied on the no-knock warrant. He lied in order to obtain the warrant that they used to enter Breonna Taylor's home in the first place. And it appears that those officers were not even put on the table, or charges for them, against them, were not even presented to the grand jury. But again, the juror has not said that. It is actually Daniel Cameron who said that himself. What the juror is specifically calling for is not just the transcripts to be released, but that the transcripts be released, and that also they would lift the sort of gag order, if you will, that the jurors are under, where they are unable to speak about the grand jury case and what was presented to them. And the reason why those two things are important is because the transcripts do not include moments when the tapes were not playing, when things were not being recorded, other conversations that may have happened. And so the juror wants to be able to also speak out, and the fellow jurors to be able to speak out to tell the story of what happened. Now, the one thing that they did say is that what was presented in that press conference that Daniel Cameron did last week is not the same as what actually happened in the room. That's important for us. And I think that this is groundbreaking in this case because the very capable attorneys of Breonna Taylor's family, Attorney Lanita Baker, Attorney Sam Aguiar, and Attorney Ben Crump, all have said that they did not believe charges were actually filed or presented to the grand jury for Breonna Taylor. And we didn't have that information. And so this juror's courageousness is helping us to expose what we knew to be true. So I think that when you ask the question, sort of where do we go from here? This is an important step, not just to unveiling some of the corruption that took place in this case, but also for us to begin the work to figure out how to stop grand juries from being a part of any police hearings and police investigations, because it is an outdated system that protects police and protects the system, and we actually need transparency.
On that note of wanting more information, there does appear to be some lack of clarity over whether officers in fact identified themselves before entering Breonna's apartment and how clearly that happened if so. So can you kind of just walk me through what are some of the key areas that activists are looking for further clarity as the recordings and transcripts become available?
Right. So I think it is very clear. What is clear is that of either 12 or 13 witnesses have all said that they did not hear anyone respond or announcing themselves. So when I say respond, the reason why I raised that is because Kenny Walker, who was inside the apartment, Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, says that they heard knocks and they got up out of their sleep, out of the bed, and they went to find out who is it. So they called out, who is it? But there was no response to Breonna and Kenny's question about who was outside the door. The neighbors, all of the witnesses that we have heard from, have all aligned with that. They have all actually been able to give credibility to Kenny's statement. There was one I was going to say juror, but actually one witness who may be the 13th or the 12th, I'm not exactly sure, but this one witness changed his story. The first time, and I believe a second time, he said that he heard no announcement of who was outside in the apartment complex area. He did not hear that announcement. Later on, his story changed where he said he did believe that police announced themselves. The issue with that, though, is that this gentleman also says that he went to walk outside of his home to see what was going on. And when he opened the door and walked outside, police approached him and told him, police, get back in your home, get back in your home. It is very possible. I'm not the lawyer. I'm not speaking officially on behalf of the family or the case, but it is very possible that when he said that police announced themselves, he was speaking to when he tried to approach the scene to see what was happening in his apartment complex. And therefore, for us, it is very clear, very clear. In fact, in the last few days, we've heard from the attorney for the grand juror who has filed this motion. And the grand juror says that the question came up at some point. I don't know if it was in the grand jury or at a press conference, but the question came up, why only use the one person, not the 12 or the majority who have said that they did not hear an announcement of the police being there? Why only use the one person whose story has changed multiple times? So we're pretty sure of what it is that we're seeing here in this situation.
Let's take a step back here just to kind of remind our viewers about how we got here. Breonna Taylor's name is a name that we have heard all summer, but it's in the last week that these national protests have been reignited. And that's because one of the officers was charged with endangering Breonna's neighbors, but none of the three officers were charged with her actual death. I know that you're a close ally of the family. Can you tell me what their reaction to the last week has been?
Yeah, there's a lot of pain in Breonna Taylor's family. Her mother, Tamika Palmer, is clearly a broken woman. She is broken, but yet very, very, very clear that she must remain strong and vigilant in fighting for her daughter. They're a very courageous group of beautiful people. However, of course, there is pain. Also, we have to remember Janiyah Palmer, which is Tamika's other daughter, Breonna Taylor's sister, who actually lived in the house with Breonna, and her room was riddled with bullets. But she wasn't home that night. So if she had been home, she probably would have been a second victim. And Tamika Palmer would have buried two daughters and not just one. So those realities are really heavy. I can only imagine that Janiyah is walking around feeling like she should have been there either to protect her sister, or she probably would have given her own life so that her sister did not die. How come it wasn't me? That's a survivor's remorse thing. And so people often forget when we get into the politics of dealing with these cases, we forget that there are real live people that are dealing with this trauma. Kenny Walker was in the apartment. He watched his girlfriend, his soulmate, someone that they were getting ready to start a family together. He watched her die. The only thing that Kenny did was try to protect her by firing that one warning shot. And that is being used by the system. It is being used by white supremacists online. It is being used by trolls and everyone else to try to make him the villain, when in fact, that is exactly what we ask, especially our partners, a male partner in your home to do, is to try to protect and defend your home and those who are inside of it. So this situation is tragic. It's very painful. And those of us who have become very close with the family in terms of helping them to fight are experiencing a deep level of trauma at this time.
I do want to address some comments that you recently made at a press conference held by Breonna Taylor's family attorney, Benjamin Crump. You made some remarks about Attorney General Daniel Cameron in which you called him a sellout and blasted him for his lack of commitment to the Black community. Why do you think that Attorney General Cameron, in your words, is upholding the system of white supremacy?
Well, we're watching it play out today. I'm sure there were some that my words ruffled their feathers, but today I've actually been receiving phone calls from people, and I've actually watched people on social media begin to say, wow, I now see what Tamika was talking about. It is very clear that Daniel Cameron never wanted to present a case that was a full and transparent case so that the people, the jurors, the grand jury would be able to decide the fate of those officers. He was upholding what he promised to the Fraternal Order of Police, which is the police union. He was the national organization. He was upholding the promise that he made to them, where he said, I understand what this endorsement means, that I am to be an advocate and a voice for law enforcement. That is what he said. Understanding the challenges between law enforcement and the Black community, understanding the level of racism that the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, has spewed against Black folks, against every victim, against protesters, understanding that to say that you are standing with these individuals, you can't stand with the majority of the Black community at the same time, because those two things are in deep, deep conflict with one another. And so what I have said, I stand by, because we are beginning to see it play out right before our eyes, that he actually stood with the police and he did not do his job on behalf of Breonna Taylor.
Tamika, I know that part of the settlement that the family reached with the city requires that the police department make some changes to itself, like requiring officers to undergo drug and alcohol testing if they've been involved in shootings. What are some of the changes that Breonna's family and activists are hoping will happen in the long run?
Well, Breonna's family has said very clearly that this situation has gotten bigger. It's beyond Breonna Taylor at this point. There's nothing that we can do to bring her back. We can only fight for justice for her. But Tamika Palmer and Bianca Austin, which is Breonna's aunt, have been very clear that the goal is to fight for justice for the Breonnas that are living today, the Breonnas who are home sleeping in their beds, hoping that police don't barge in and kill them in the middle of the night. And in order to do that, in order to protect young men, young women, to protect Black folks in general, and people who are disenfranchised by the system, there has to be not just reform, but an overhaul of the system. And so the family is very clear that the ban on no-knock warrants is really, really critical. Not just, well, in Louisville, Kentucky, that ban has actually passed thanks to the work of Katora Herron, who works with the ACLU in Louisville. She was able, along with many advocates, to get no-knock warrants banned after Breonna Taylor's murder. However, the state of Kentucky has not banned no-knock warrants. So this situation, identical situation, could play out again. And so in Kentucky, that needs to be done. Representative Attica Scott is carrying that legislation, and many of us are joining them to push for no-knock warrants to be banned across the state. In the reform package that was included in the settlement, there were a number of important things in terms of how warrants are actually signed, making sure that there are high-level individuals within the police department checking those warrants, and that they are not just an officer able to just make up any lie, maybe run it by a supervisor who's not necessarily looking at the details of the case, and go and present it to a judge who signs off without there being any checks and balances. These things have to be dealt with. There's a number of reform items in the settlement. I suggest that people look it up. I think it is incredible, and we know it is historic for a family to say, not just money settlement, but also there has to be real changes to the police department. How they implement those changes is a different situation, and that's what we have to stay on the ground and make sure happens.
A lot of people are using Breonna Taylor's death and other incidents like George Floyd's death that have also exposed systemic racism as a tool to motivate people to vote. So what do you tell those who feel that regardless of who's in office, Democrat or Republican, nothing will change?
You know what, I tell them that I understand how they feel. We've seen how under Democrats, and including President Obama, you had names of people who were killed by police sort of rack up. You know, Mike Brown, which is one of the biggest movements that we have actually seen in this generation around police accountability and police brutality. You know, that happened under Obama. Tamir Rice, that happened under Obama. Corinne Gaines happened under Obama. And so not only was he a Democrat, he's a Black man, someone who we know was very sensitive to the issues of racial violence, of the issues between police and the Black community. And yet still, under his leadership, we still had so many hashtags come about. And so I understand why people feel that it doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican, because the issue is not who's president. The issue is that the system is rotten at its core. And that, again, it has to be overhauled in order to make these changes. When you have a system that we understand in terms of policing that started during slavery as a part of the system to keep slaves in line, and that some of those practices have not changed, there is no president that could come into office and do anything other than to say, we're going to tear it down and rebuild the system. And so I get that frustration. But what we're looking at today in this particular president, who is, in my judgment, a fascist, who is, in my judgment, his desire is to become a dictator in this country, and he is being supported by many individuals who are also, in my opinion, they do not have the best interests of those people who are the most disenfranchised and marginalized in this country. What we see happening at protests, where not only are police officers being extremely abusive to people who are literally saying, I just don't want to die and I want to see justice happen in this nation. But not only are we seeing the police doing that, also the white militia has been out there on the ground, literally working with law enforcement in some places. And we saw what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse in Rochester, where this man shot, or this young boy shot and killed two people and blew someone else's arm off. And the president stood at the podium and said, made excuses for this young man. And so when I see these things happening, we have to understand that no, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are not the answer, but we know if they are not the answer, Donald Trump and Mike Pence and all of their cronies are absolutely not the answer. I would rather fight Kamala and Joe Biden. I would rather be able to get on the phone with people who are sensible, who I believe care about our issues, and try to work through things with them. It still means we got to get on the ground. We can't get out the streets. We have to continue to push them. But I do not believe that the current administration that we're working with is one that will change. I think it will get worse as they are unhinged at a point where they don't have an election to win again in 2024. So I think that's the reason why people need to show up. The best way, there's one thing not to participate and you don't know what will happen. Well, excuse me, to participate and not know what will happen. It's something else when you don't participate at all. We can be pretty sure at that point what will happen.
I want to leave you with a couple of questions that look ahead. Mm-hmm. Are you hopeful that Breonna Taylor's family will get justice, and what does that look like, if so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm hopeful that Breonna Taylor's family gets justice, because justice for Breonna means justice for me. I see myself in her. There are so many young women who are starting their lives, trying to make sure that they're going in the right direction. Breonna was studying to become a nurse. And she was a beautiful young woman by all accounts, and certainly by the love and grace that I have found in her family. If she was anything like the individuals that I have met, she was a beautiful, beautiful young lady. And so justice for her is critically important, especially at this time in the movement when we feel like we have actually pushed the narrative so strong and so hard that many people who weren't at the table before are beginning to come to the table. But justice for Breonna Taylor also looks like a change to the ways that our system operates. It looks like an overhaul to the American justice system as it currently stands. And so that's a long haul. Yes, we want to see that a new grand jury is impaneled and that a special prosecutor is put in place that is not conflicted to present evidence to them on Breonna Taylor's death specifically. And so that's immediate justice. But long term, justice for Breonna means justice for Black Americans, and it means justice for Black women.
Thank you, Tamika Mallory, for spending some time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Lysandra and Tamika, for that very important conversation. As activists like Tamika Mallory continue to seek justice for those who are killed by police, we remember the families who they've left behind: brothers, sisters, fathers, and mothers. We recently caught up with Sybrina Fulton, an activist and the mother of Trayvon Martin, a teenager who was killed in 2012. After the passing of her son, Sybrina formed the Trayvon Martin Foundation to help end gun violence. She's also been a leader in supporting other mothers who have lost their children due to racially charged incidents. Here's why Sybrina Fulton says it's necessary to continue the fight for justice.
It's very painful. It's very disappointing to know that 8 years later, we're still going through it. We've been going through this, all our lives. If you're African American, this is a way of life for you. It's hard to fight a system that has been that way for 400 years. I don't take those things on a personal level and say, okay, this is about Trayvon Martin. This is about me. This is about my family. I believe in the bigger picture. The Mothers of the Movement came about because we were already connected. We would see each other in the same circles. And so we were very close at the time. We got invited by Secretary Hillary Clinton to have a meeting with her. We did a few phone calls, and then we actually met in 2015, and that's how we created Mothers of the Movement, from moving forward in the political arena. Through the Trayvon Martin Foundation, we have Circle of Mothers, and that's mothers who lost their child through senseless gun violence. It started off being like that. Now I have mothers whose child maybe committed suicide, died from an illness, police brutality. We try to lift each other up. I still feel his presence. I know when he's, really, really happy about something I've done or something that I've said, I can feel it. And so I always tell people, not even the death of my son will separate me from the love of my son. So he's going to always be my son. You never stop being a mom to your children. This has become my life work. I started off just being a spokesperson for Trayvon Martin, but it's turned into so much more. And I realized this is not just about Trayvon. This is about all the Trayvon Martins that you have not met, that you do not know. I speak on behalf of some of those people who you're never going to meet them. You're never going to hear their story. You're never going to hear about their tragedy. And so we have to continue to speak up. We can't give up. We have to continue to speak up and stand up.
Welcome back. You're watching Time 100 Talks, and I'm correspondent Ashley Seaford. Let's keep the show going, shall we? Up next, we have actor, composer, and lyricist Lin-Manuel Miranda and his father, political consultant Luis Miranda. They'll be joined by Time CEO and editor-in-chief Edward Felsenthal.
Hi, I'm Edward Felsenthal, editor-in-chief of Time, and I'm joined today by the great composer, actor, artist Lin-Manuel Miranda and his father, Luis Miranda, the subject of a new film on HBO called Siempre Luis. Luis is a longtime political consultant and force in New York, and it's just great to have you both with us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You're both such kinetic people. I watched the film we're going to discuss last night, and an overriding theme is energy and action. How are you both coping with months of quarantine?
He's the more frenetic one, which is why he gets a whole documentary about how frenetic he is. So why don't you start with how you've adjusted to life in pandemic 2020?
One of the things that I realized is that I don't have to take a plane every time I need to do something. I have realized that I have handled many, many things, including getting involved in politics in Florida to no end in this election cycle without getting on a plane and ever going to Orlando. So for me, that really has been a revelation. I always thought I needed to get there. And now I realize that there's tons that you could do from afar. But that also means, which is the beauty, that I could do 3 times more. Yeah. Because I don't need to add a 3-hour plane ride where I have to watch a movie.
I sort of see his revelation with the tragic undertone of that's 3 more hours my dad is on the internet, as opposed to, taking a break, maybe having a snack or whatever the inflated meal is. As for me, I was directing my first film when this all started. And so I kind of pivoted to, I think the first 2 months, we all just were trying to figure out what's the new normal. How do we keep our families safe? How do we keep the most vulnerable in our family safe, and that was a big part of our time. And then I kind of very slowly made my way back to writing, and now we're starting back up on the film we began at the beginning of the year, Tick Tick Boom, for Netflix.
The new documentary, Siempre Luis. The film opens. I don't think I'm spoiling anything. With you've had a heart attack, and I guess it's to some extent examining the pace of your life and what's possible. And toward the end, you talk about, we all have an eternal rest at some point. Too much work to do now to sleep. I think you get 5.5 hours of sleep. If I got that right in the film.
On a good day, yes.
On a good day. Do you see? It does sound Hamiltonian. Do you when you watch your son in the role? Do you see anything Hamiltonian in yourself? Does it resonate?
Not really. That's the way people should be, because we will get much more accomplished. We will do many, many good things in life for your family, for your friends, for everyone around you. I actually, when Lin-Manuel said it the first time, I said, I could get that, but isn't the way everyone ought to be? So for me, it was more aspirational as well, that you should try to use as many brain cells as you could possibly can in your lifetime, because there'll be a moment when all those cells are dead and you're going to go to eternity.
I will add, though, but Hamilton has become, it is sometimes a pejorative. It's sometimes a shorthand in our family for impulsiveness. If someone has said something nasty and he's like, I'm going to write him an email. I'm going to say this and this. And I go, Hamilton. He goes, all right, I'll wait till the morning and I'll read it again in the morning. So there's also a rashness that is dangerous. That was also in Hamilton's character. I don't believe you have, but we do use it as use it as a shorthand for don't Hamilton this, give it a break, give it a rest, think on it.
And that actually I got where now everyone in the family, if they're around, I try to make those decisions when I'm alone so I could do whatever the heck I want. And nobody is sort of stopping me, because I actually believe that your guts and your gut reaction, it's the best reaction to anything. It may be a little harsh and it may hurt people's feelings on the receiving end, but when our intellect and all of that gets in the way, all of a sudden you're filtering info, which now I do much more because of the influence of Hamilton in my life.
How is that? You temper your reactions?
I do. I actually will write an email that it's probably hot-headed and it's coming from a space of, I really need to smack you. And I may just sleep on the email or...
Oh, sleep. Yes, sleep is important. Thank you.
It's sort of where I thought it would go, because what struck me watching the film, there's a moment in the film, Luis, where you talk about your mother and how she pushed you, and if you got a 95, she'd say, did anybody get 100? I relate a little to that, and I think about
a good mother.
But and I wondered, did you push your kids the same way?
I did. We also send them to therapy to handle it. But I did. I wanted them to go beyond the minimum or what was expected or the average. I wanted them to excel on everything they were doing. And and pushed very hard for that to happen. I, I always remember my daughter was in high school. Uh, she needed to do a paper and needed to interview an ambassador or someone for a particular term paper. And I had made an appointment and she interviewed, I believe it was the ambassador or the consul general of Mexico, and then sat on the information and on the recording until the very last minute. And Sunday, when I said, let's read what you wrote, it was horrible. It did not represent all of the work that she had done to that point. And what she was presenting to the professor was crappy. And I took it and I tore it apart. And it was handwritten, so it was not, there was no other copy. This is not computer thing. And I said, now we're going to be up all night. I'll stay with you. We're going to review the tape. You're going to take notes about the tape. We're going to organize it. And then you're going to write a report that represents the homework and the care that they should have. And so I pushed, but to the extent I could, I was always available to help in getting that next level.
Is fact? Can we fact check?
I've never heard this story before. This is wild to me. I can't wait till my sister sees this interview.
Well, get my daughter. She was not very happy, but she was very happy with the end result and with the grade later on.
Yeah, no, it seems like it worked out. There on the therapy, there's a great Nora Ephron line that the most you can hope for from your own children is that they grow up able to pay for their own therapy.
Yes.
Let's shift gears to Puerto Rico, which is, of course, also a major theme and place in the documentary and in your lives. You describe it in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria and the devastation of that hurricane as this perfect place that all of a sudden doesn't exist anymore. And I wondered how you are thinking about Puerto Rico now that we're 3 years out from the hurricane. Does it still exist in your mind in the same way? Where is it in its recovery?
It always existed, and in fact, we always sent the kids for a month during the year when my parents were alive. And for me, it's part of my identity. So what has happened since Maria, it's that the idyllic, perfect place where my parents were from, where I went for nurturance, where I just enjoyed Puerto Rico, has shifted and has evolved. And now I think that what Hurricane Maria brought in my mind, it's the political contradictions of an island where everything gets maximized to a level that sometimes it's not necessary. And I have learned through the Maria experience of how difficult it has been for Puerto Ricans. Remember, I left at 19,
right?
But many, many, many people stayed, and life has not been easy. And I think that when that happens to people, particularly under colonialism, there is a contradiction that I have learned after Maria that was never present in my head. It was a thought, it was cognitive, but it was not experiential as it is now.
Lin-Manuel, how, interested in how it felt to you, what it meant to you to bring Hamilton there, on that trip, and
Yeah, I mean, it really was an example of sort of the mission shifting. Puerto Rico is a place of pride. I obviously have a different relationship, having only spent a month a year there every year, but I'm grateful for that month because I feel like I have a real connection to family on the island and the island itself that a lot of folks who grow up in the States and who have parents from there don't have. So I was always sort of grateful for that connection. And the moment in the Heights, my first show had a tour. We figured out how to get the tour to Puerto Rico, and it was the first equity tour ever to go to Puerto Rico. And I just felt so proud to bring my work there and to bring my work to my extended family there. And so the moment the New York Times gave us the review they gave us, I knew we were somehow bringing Hamilton to Puerto Rico just as a show of pride. And I will always bring any art I make to Puerto Rico because it's important to me. But then so we were already in the planning stages of inaugurating a new touring company in Puerto Rico because that seemed to be the easiest way to bring it there, was to actually launch a tour there and then bring that to the mainland instead of shipping it the other way around. And then as soon as Maria happened, it became, how can this help Puerto Rico? We never for a moment, even though the devastation was unimaginable and unprecedented, our schedule was still a year and a half away, and we realized Puerto Rico is going to need all the help it can get in the short term and the long term. We decided to earmark any money that Hamilton made there for artists and arts organizations on the island, which often get left behind in relief efforts. And so that became the mission, and that became our lives for the next year and a half.
I wanted to take you back to your home now in New York, terribly hard hit, of course, in so many ways by the pandemic. Much deepened inequality, theaters still closed, restaurants struggling so terribly. We're all reading from time to time, can New York come back? What's the future of New York? As New Yorkers, we've lived this before. And Luis, I wanted to ask you, as somebody who's devoted so much of your life to the city, how do you see New York right now and its prospects?
What attracted me to New York the day after I got here and sort of realized, holy macaroni, this is where I belong for the rest of my life, is what continues to attract me to New York. People don't give up. People will try harder. Politicians who are not good, will get rid of them and bring others. New ideas get on the table and people try new things. I am amazed now, and then we'll get used to it. Like my neighborhood, Washington Heights, we have tons of restaurants and we have no parking. People who have cars suffer before the pandemic just looking for a place to park. Well, half of those parkings are gone because now there are tables there and people are coexisting and realizing this is what it takes to have this as part of our experience in our neighborhood. And I believe that spirit of working harder, shifting, rearranging, it's so New York that will propel us as it did on 9/11 or the 1888 and the 70s economic decline. We have gone through cycles of difficulty, and this one, it's hard and it may take more, but if we hang in there, we'll handle it and we'll get to the other side.
Beautifully said. Lin-Manuel, what about the theater industry? What are you hearing? What can we all do to support it?
I mean, a couple of things. I think one, I think you can support those artists you love. I think that you've seen an explosion of Zoom classes and virtual theater and incredible fundraisers for the Actors Fund. Our friend Seth Rudetsky has put on a show every Tuesday and Friday with his Stars in the House and has raised an enormous amount for not just actors, but seamstresses and front of house staff. And we're all holding each other together as best we can. I can also tell you, this is also happening in the midst of a new civil rights movement, and we're having serious conversations about systemic racism. Nowhere is that more present than the Great White Way. And I can tell you, for Hamilton's part, we have weekly calls with our casts, with our various companies, and what's been amazing is the energy that would be going towards 8 tours a week has now gone towards these challenges that are facing our country, whether it's systemic racism, whether it's mobilizing the vote. I've seen just incredible energy from our company in terms of doing that. But in terms of the larger picture for theater, it's I have no doubt we'll be back. I don't know in what space, but what's exciting to me is that theater practitioners are looking to create a more equitable and a more just space for when we return, so that that audience for Hamilton is as diverse as the cast of Hamilton, and hopefully that front of house staff. So we're working on those bigger questions because we have time to. It's not business as usual. So let's grapple with some of the bigger inequities that have faced our corner of the arts world for a long time.
The other thing that I have seen, it's that smaller theaters, museums that before got no play because the big places took all the oxygen, all of a sudden become important. And they become important because there's tourism in New York, and sort of the little theater in a neighborhood, it's now important. We see NYC and Company, for example, doing an entire campaign on how do we visit what we have in New York and how do we support. Same thing with small businesses. Before, they were not as important as they are right now. And people understanding how they bring character to neighborhood and how they ought to be staples in our lives. All of those changes are taking place right now.
Last question. High altitude, but really stems from what you've just been saying. Lin-Manuel, all of your work, or so much of your work, is about the American experiment and a better vision, a better future for the American experiment. And how are you feeling now about the state of that experiment? And I mean, there's so much pressure for change that could be positive, but also a great deal of resistance to change. And just wondering how you look at the state of that experiment right now.
I don't know if I have any more wisdom than anybody else. I do know that I think the scariest thing about our particular time is that we seem to increasingly be a nation that has its own set of facts and chooses its own reality based on our social media feeds, the algorithms, whatever your Facebook page is saying. And that's scary because you can't really have an exchange of ideas if you're working off different fact sheets. I think that's the scariest thing, honestly, about this time. That being said, in the election of 1800, Jefferson had a newspaper and Adams had a newspaper, and they printed lies about each other during that election. So it's also not new. It's just that the news travels at the speed of a click now. So it's just, it is more dangerous than it was with the printing press. That's the scariest thing to me, but I also think that there's enormous hope in these times, because when I see the peaceful protests that are going on and I see the diversity on display, that white bodies are standing up for Black and brown bodies in the streets, that gives me enormous hope. And the fact that honestly, when a corporation says Black Lives Matter, that is actually exciting to me, because they have made the calculation that this is a big change, and this is they're on the right side of history, and that makes me feel hopeful.
For me as an old person, it's so hopeful. You know, I with Trump winning the election, it was so depressing. How can this country elect this clown? I spent my 60s and my 70s in protest and trying to change the world. I probably have whatever time I have left, and this is what I'm going to take with me, this image of this horrible reality in the country. So the Black Lives Matter movement has given me the hope. Oh, wait, there's a new generation. I'm old, but there's a new generation that is fighting for the causes that are just for all of us. And the Trumps of the world are just an aberration in a country that is going to strive for something better.
Thank you so much, Lin-Manuel and Luis, for being with us today on Time 100 Talks.
Thanks for engineering this family counseling session.
Anytime.
Thank you to all of today's Time contributors and guests, and thank you for watching today's show. We hope you enjoyed it. For more information on Time 100 Talks, past or future episodes, check out time.com/Time100 Talks. We'll be back next week with another great episode. We hope to see you all then.